now we can do a history video that I got all set up last night. So I stayed up till probably 12:30 last night making this board and a team history board, which I will do a video with later. Paul Coffey. I've talked about him in videos before. Well, he's scoring a ton in 84-85, and that's where we pick up the story. And in 84-85, he is a second team All-Star despite scoring 115 points. Langway and Bork are your first team All-Stars. But he's already got 2 Stanley Cup rings. So he probably feels okay with his cup rings. But the debate, and there's a lot of talk at that point about whether or not Paul Coffey's a good defenseman or just a good scorer. And there are players in the game who say he's a fantastic defenseman. Grant Fuhr, who understood he's a teammate. But there are others as well who say he's a great defenseman, doesn't get the respect he deserves because he puts up a ton of points as well. And there's some debate about whether or not he should get more Norris voting than he is. And that debate will rage for much of his career. Defense. We talk defense. Buffalo. Buffalo has defense. Great defense. Barrasso's solid, but scoring is down. And this is something they attribute to Scotty Bowman. That Scotty Bowman, as this time went along with the Montreal Canadiens, their scoring started to drop. And then the problem is he brought in Real Cloutier with the idea that he might pick things up for Buffalo, and he doesn't. It is not a good fit. He only plays 4 games for them that year. He ends up going to the American Hockey League to try to get his game back, and they send him home. So that does not help Scotty Bowman's offense at all. Calgary has a rough year. Kent Nilsson has a rougher year. He ends up being traded after this season, although he has 99 points. He only has 1 assist in 3 playoff games that he played. And it comes back to that story that when you need him, he's not there, the whole Magic Man thing. And Lanny McDonald only plays 37 games. So this is a Calgary team that has some troubles in 85. They're going to get better in 86. But for 84-85, there's some problems. And they get rid of Kent Nilsson with the idea that we're done. And we'll come back around on Nilsson again in a second here. Orville Tessier. Remember a couple videos ago I said there were a chance to make him mayor? Yep. He has a chance now to be mayor because he gets fired in February. So with him being fired in February, really clears the schedule so he can run for mayor. Bob Pulford takes over, and the team goes 16-7-4 with him behind the bench. So it's one of those things where the general manager gets behind the bench, the players go, okay, the guy who can actually trade us is behind us right now. Might want to turn it up a little bit. So Chicago looks pretty good coming out of that, and yet we're going to see them fall back into mediocrity, sadly, again. Chicago struggles a lot with maintaining their excellence over the 80s and 90s. Daryl Sittler ends up getting bought out by the Detroit Red Wings. So they get him from Philadelphia. Philadelphia wanted to get rid of him. They get rid of him. And it takes less than a full season for Detroit to say he's not what he was. So they buy him out. And Devellano's patience ends at the end of that year and heads start to roll. They've made the playoffs. They're a playoff team, but he wants more than playoffs. He wants something more than that. And so he starts moving people out. He brings in Harry Neale from Vancouver. We know that's not going to end well because it's 30-some years later, and we know how that turns out. But we'll get into that, but he's not very patient with Detroit, and that will have its own rewards soon enough. The Whalers, they finish really strong. Do you trust the strong finish? We'll see in the 85-86 video how it turns out. But they finished strong in 84-85, but missed the playoffs for a 5th straight year. So this is kind of where the whole, the attendance might be dropping, might be losing money. Later, this might be part of the reason why. Hartford fans get used to things not going very well. You've got fans coming in from Boston to watch games between the Whalers and the Bruins and chanting Hartford failures, which was the thing, and then there was a bust up in the crowd. So yeah, it's not a great time for the Whalers. Guy Lafleur retires during this season as his numbers drop, so he sees his role diminished and his numbers going down, and he sees the writing on the wall, and he goes, well, I'm out. And so the Montreal Canadiens, mere months after Steve Penney leads them on this miraculous run, are watching Guy Lafleur walk out the door, and that leaves a vacuum when it comes to leadership among the French superstars. Um, he had been, you could trace back to Richard, and before that it was always a bunch of flying Frenchmen who were the Montreal Canadiens' dominant core, and that kind of ends when Lafleur leaves. Their number one scorer that year is Mats Naslund. I like Naslund. Most people did, but he's not French. So Lafleur leaving is kind of, there's some of that identity of the Montreal dynasties, which they never really get back. The Los Angeles Kings, they have a strong playoffs for Bob Janesic, which means that this guy, Rogie Vachon, made a smart move for 1 year. It goes off the rails for Janesic after that year. But Marcel Dion, over 120 points, even though it's his 15th year. He's 34 years of age, and he's still putting up a ton of points. And he's still the most respected guy in the league who can't get a Stanley Cup. He is unable to win a Stanley Cup because he plays for the Kings. The Minnesota North Stars, on getting Kent Nilsson, GM at the time, Lou Nanne, says the following. If Kent Nilsson, meaning Kent Nilsson, worked hard every night, they wouldn't have traded him. So he asked, is there an actual record keeping for players with bad 100-point seasons? And he says straight out, the guy has more talent than anybody in the league other than Gretzky. He's just got to work for it. And so that's kind of if you look at the career numbers for Nilsson, the first thing that stands out is his points per game is insanely good. And you're like, why didn't he play longer in the NHL? Was he hurt? Not really. Teams gave up, and he goes to Minnesota at the end of this season, and he's not in Minnesota for a long time after that. He's there for about a year and a half, a year and 2/3. The New York Rangers, they drop 31 points in the standings. They just absolutely drop. But because Pittsburgh and New Jersey are in their division, they make the playoffs. So while the Patrick is known for normally being pretty darn tough, at this point in time, Pittsburgh and New Jersey mean that it's not. Pittsburgh's got Mario. The New Jersey Devils have Muller, but because of how much they gutted themselves to run for Mario, it's hard to make that improvement. So the New York Rangers are a playoff team kind of by default. Remember, 16 out of 21 teams make the playoffs at this point in time. The Philadelphia Flyers, surprise, they're back, they're relevant, they're great. Bobby Clark's fantastic. They end up going on a run to the Stanley Cup Finals under Mike Keenan. And Keenan is heralded as this fantastic new wave coach that's, this is how it's going to be done now, and he's no nonsense. And Pelle Lindbergh wins 40 games and gets the Vezina Trophy. So this is before Keenan has any reputation for pulling goalies way too often and way too easily. And Pelle Lindbergh has his best year in his sadly too short career. Really, honestly, if not for the car accident, which tragically took Pelle Lindbergh at a young age, I think he would end up being a Hall of Famer. I really do. Fantastic kid. And then, if you want to do the what if, what would that do then when Ron Hextall would have forced his way onto a roster? If Philly had Pelle Lindbergh, where would Hextall have ended up? Toronto. So drafting first overall, the Toronto Maple Leafs have a choice. And they could have drafted Craig Simpson, who was a forward. But they said, no, we're going to draft Wendel Clark, and we're going to convert him to a forward. He's drafted as a defenseman. And scouts tell the Leafs, listen, he is best suited to be a defenseman. Don't convert him to forward just because he's got pretty good hands around the net. They convert him to forward. And the rest is history, right? Wendel Clark, fantastic player with this great history with the Leafs. And I don't think there would be very many people now who would know Wendel Clark was drafted as a defenseman. A lot of people thought he would have made a better defenseman than a forward. Pittsburgh, how bad are things in Pittsburgh? Roberto Romano openly talks about retiring at age 22. Yeah. The goalie of the future, he had been labeled by Pittsburgh, and at age 22, he's like, maybe I've had enough. I've had enough. I started shaving last week, and I think I've had enough of this hockey thing. Just insane. St. Louis, quick exit in round one. Where St. Louis is starting to suffer, and this is just me talking, is that they don't draft in 1983. That's a whole year of prospects you don't have. And this is before we had like a robust NCAA market and overagers that are getting signed that, end up being a big steal. St. Louis, with that 1 year, they just don't have the organizational depth. So as much as Jacques Demers is making good with what he has, come playoff time, when we know that we have a war of attrition and players are getting injured, he just doesn't have enough. The Vancouver Canucks, this is the year that sees the end of the Flying V. That's it. It's done. And Harry Neal's on his way out as well. It's a horrible year. So the Canucks are like, okay, we're going to change management, change jerseys, and then everybody just pretend those V things didn't happen. I'm sure nobody will ever talk about them again. We know nobody's ever going to wear them again. Just see them, they're ugly. They're hideous. So the Canucks trying to reinvent themselves, and that's the thing that they do every few years. I'm glad that they've stayed pretty consistent with the Orca since the mid-90s. I know there's people who don't like it, and they want Johnny Canuck or Stick and Rink or go back to the skate, but this is why the skate wasn't that great either, because this technically is skate era. Right? When they had the Flying V, the skate logo is right here. Capitals, 3 straight playoff losses to the New York Islanders. And that's not really a surprise. You got Mike Bossy, Brian Trottier, Billy Smith, and the boys. So it's not a surprise that the Capitals, led by Mike Gartner, have a hard time getting past them. But Pat Reagan, bless him, he has a problem with saying the wrong things at the wrong time. And he plays in Washington, D.C. Did I mention that? During the World Championships, he makes some pretty strong anti-U.S. statements. Where after Canada beats the U.S., he basically says, I'm really glad we beat the Americans because I'm sick of these American kids coming in all cocky and full of themselves, and they're taking Canadian jobs, and I don't think that's right, and so we need to let them know who's boss, this kind of thing, and oh man. So Pat Reagan, an outspoken player, basically doesn't want an American taking his job. Well, he plays in Washington, D.C. It's almost the end of his career, though. I don't think he was a starter for much longer than this. So, probably pretty awkward for him when he went back to Washington, D.C. as a non-American to complain about all the... I mean... Anyway. Okay. Enough of that. And I liked Pat Reagan, but that quote... No. Don't... What are you doing? I wonder if he gave like a speech the following season before the season started. I want to let you guys know I'm not talking about you because none of you are good enough to take my job. I'm talking about them. And then that just wouldn't make it better, but he'd think in his head like this'll smooth everything over. I need to let the mouth breathers up there know that they can't take my job anyways, and then we'll be okay. And then they'll love me again. No. The career of Pat Reagan, you say? Only if I can dig up some more quotes from him does that happen. And maybe it does. This video may very well cause the career of Pat Reagan to come out, and it may be an amazing video. Winnipeg Jets. So to close things out with the Winnipeg Jets, Dale Hawerchuk gets an 8-year, $3.2 million contract from Winnipeg. Yeah, that's $3 million for the entire length of the contract. So Hawerchuk, they want to pay him like he's a star. Here's $400,000 a year for you, kid, for that 130 points. Third in the NHL in points behind Yari Curry and Wayne Gretzky. And he's a hero. He's a hero in Winnipeg. They do beat Calgary in round 1, and then they're swept in round 2 by Edmonton. So again, they get swept by Edmonton, but they get out of round 1, they get past Calgary. So basically they make sure that Nilsson is out of Calgary because they win that series, and Hawerchuk becomes a hero in the city of Winnipeg. But that's it for the 84-85 season, which sees the Oilers win their second straight cup. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.